Hello, everyone, and welcome. As people are virtually filing in, we're going to just wait another minute or two, and then we'll get things started. So we're just going to wait one more minute, and then we will get rolling. Hopefully, all is well in your part of the country. Love if you could just put your, whereabouts you're from in the chat, so we can kind of just see where people are joining us from. Of course, I gave instructions, not realizing that the chat had been disabled because we'll be using the Q&A function for that part. But anyway, we'll get rolling, folks. Hi, everyone. My name is Bruce McDonald. I'm the president and CEO here at Imagine Canada, one of the organizations on the Fair Funding for Nonprofit Steering Committee. It's my great pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to everyone here. We know how busy everyone is, and for you to take time out of your incredibly active schedules, we're really appreciative and hope that this starts the creation of even a broader coalition. We're so happy to have you all present as we officially launch Fair Funding for Nonprofits, a coalition that's actually been in the works for several years. However, before we get into that conversation, we'd like to begin by taking a moment to acknowledge the physical lands that we're joining from here today, even during a virtual event. And for that, we'll use Imagine Canada's land acknowledgement. Imagine Canada's staff, operations, work, and network depend on traditional Indigenous territories to provide us physical space, sustenance, safety, and community to work, live, and play. Our physical head office is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wyandot. We acknowledge that these lands are covered by Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. We acknowledge these lands are still home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We acknowledge that our ability to live and work on these lands today is a direct benefit of policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during the time of settlement and confederation and since. The harms of these policies are many and are still being felt in Indigenous communities today. We express gratitude toward the Indigenous peoples who have and will continue to steward these lands. We commit to amplifying the voices of Indigenous peoples and working against the everyday forces of white supremacy and colonialism present in the nonprofit sector. We are actively engaging in training and education related to reconciliation and decolonization. We aim to listen, learn, establish meaningful relationships with our Indigenous sector colleagues, engage in courageous conversations, and take actions that advance reconciliation in the nonprofit sector. Our work is long-term and multi-generational in nature, and we recognize that it will be a continuous and intentional process to build strong relationships with our Indigenous colleagues and connect with the land. So as we move forward with the event today, we've got some great speakers, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. So please note that you must use the official Q&A function in order to participate, as we won't be taking questions from the chat. You could submit your questions at any time, but they'll be answered towards the end of the session. And a quick word about translation. Aujourd'hui, nous fournissons une traduction automatique en sous-titrage grâce à l'application Wordly. Vous recevrez une notification quand l'hôte de ce webinaire vous invite à l'utiliser Wordly. Si vous souhaitez l'utiliser, veuillez accepter l'invitation pour ouvrir l'application. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à nous demander dans la fenêtre de clavardage. So I'll repeat this in English as well. Today we're using the Wordly app to facilitate automatic closed caption translations. You'll receive a notification that your meeting host sends you an invitation to the Wordly app. And if you'd like to use it, please accept the invitation to open the Wordly app for Zoom. This meeting is being recorded, and you will receive the recording within a few weeks by email. Closed captioning is enabled, and if you have further accessibility questions, please let us know. Now, it does say in the chat, so hopefully that's working. And I just want to double check and see. We are hoping through this event to be joined by Senator Paulette Sr. Many of you might know her, as prior to being named to the Senate to represent Ontario, Senator Sr. has had a long career in the sector as a leader and advocate for charitable and nonprofit organizations, most recently as president and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. So what I should note that we had been notified that the senator has many, many meetings today, and we'll keep an eye. And as she joins us, we'll take a pause in the conversation and invite her to say a few words, as she's been such a strong advocate for our sector. But with that, we'll move on to our program for this afternoon. So the conversation is really timely in the context of what's going on today. As we see this current federal government having a focus on efficiency and its red tape review process, this is a wonderful opportunity for the conversations about fair funding for our sector. So today we're joined by Shannon Kindornay, Deputy CEO at Cooperation Canada, and Trenae Hancock, Associate Director of Programs and Service Delivery at CCE Center for Young Black Professionals. So we'll start off first, I think, with Shannon. Can you tell us a bit about your work and how you've been involved in the coalition to date?
Great. Thanks for the warm welcome, Bruce. So hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to share space with you today. As Bruce said, I'm Shannon Kindornay, the Deputy CEO at Cooperation Canada. And we are a coalition of over 100 members working in the international cooperation ecosystem. So our members work in the space of humanitarian action and the delivery of sustainable development initiatives that aim to promote a fairer, safer, and more sustainable world all around the world. As a coalition, one of our key priorities is around supporting an enabling environment for nonprofits and in Canada and globally to do their work. So for about a year, I've served on the Fair Funding for Nonprofits Steering Committee, playing a role in defining the strategies and actions we're taking to advance our agenda. But I'm also a member of the Advocacy Subcommittee, where we identify policy windows of opportunity, whether it's with political actors or across the federal bureaucracy, to move this agenda forward. And we collaborate closely with the two other subcommittees. One is around making the case. That group really is looking at the evidence and research we need to support these reforms, as well as the Connections Committee, which aims to grow the coalition and cultivate allies that are ready to champion this initiative with us. And part of why we're here as Cooperation Canada in this very large cross-sector initiative is that we really do believe that regulatory and legal frameworks have an outsized impact on whether civil society is able to show up where they're needed most. And when processes are overly bureaucratic, time and talent shift from community outcomes to focusing on compliance and administration. We also believe in the power of community and coalitions, and we know that collective action is needed to move the needle on this issue, which transcends any one subsector of nonprofits. Whether you work in international cooperation, arts, youth programming, health, climate action, we're all impacted by the way we're able to partner with the federal government.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, Trenae, same question. Just a bit about your work and how you've been involved in the coalition to date.
Thanks, Bruce. As you mentioned, my name is Trenae Hancock, and I'm Associate Director of Program and Service Delivery here at C Center for Young Black Professionals. At C Center for Young Black Professionals, we focus on workforce development for Black youth, those furthest away from the opportunity. We provide training, social supports, and look at what it would take to move the needle on the opportunity for the youth. We provide programming across 5 sectors, and more aligned with this work specifically in advocating for funding. In my portfolio, I have what would historically be called this trusteeship. And I say historically because some of the language that we use when we talk about funding is not aligned with what the practicalities are. And so within that portfolio, I've mentored over 100 grassroots and nonprofits through their journey of becoming more sustainable and securing more long-term funding. So when I come to this work, I'm coming with their voices and their experiences as well. And I've been a long-time member of the steering committee since its inception to today. So taking a look at what this project in its inception was going to be, and very happy to see it grow into many committees supporting each other and growing and progressing this work, and now introducing it to you all today.
Well, thanks very much. And some who have been around, might remember its previous name in terms of the Funding Reform Working Group, and now sort of blasting off as fair funding for nonprofits. So, Trinae, I'm going to come back to you right away in terms of really sort of starting at the beginning, because we see that the communities that we serve are facing many major challenges today: the housing, climate, and affordability crises, slow progress on reconciliation, labor shortages, global conflict, threats to democracy, and even economic turmoil. So, from your perspective, in the midst of all of this, why do funding issues matter for our sector?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's important to look at it in two different ways. There's the everyday needs of communities, which nonprofits are focused on addressing and trying to resolve on a day-to-day basis. So whether it's housing, whether it's affordability crisis, labor shortages, those are everyday issues that are impacting our community. So when nonprofits are coming to the table for that, they're dealing with a pot of funding. And so what often is at play in terms of funding issues is their capacity to address it based upon the funding that they're getting. Nonprofits are often putting more out than what they're getting in terms of funding, and it can impact their team's capacity to address these issues. Their team members are getting burned out and their funding is getting drained. They are very much at the mercy of the funding bodies to offer the funding on these issues, and it often becomes quite competitive. And so the pot is staying the same, but the need is getting bigger and bigger in terms of every day. And also acknowledging that these everyday issues are not going away. They're actually growing as our population grows and time grows, and different aspects are put into the conversation, like global conflict, climate change. These are all growing things, and none of them really seem to be addressed. So it's putting strain on the nonprofits for every day. And as nonprofits, we're not able to gain a profit and have year-over-year year-over-year profit. And so we're really starting at a zero every single year to address these long-term pieces. The other lens that I look at this through is emerging needs, and often that's crisis that are coming up within the community. The nonprofit sector holds a huge responsibility to addressing their communities, but in those responses, it's often challenging. If you take a look at any crisis that's happened, and let's say we use a hospital for example, they often have a stock and they often have some bargaining tools to replenish that stock, whereas nonprofits, they're fixed on their programming for a year. They don't often have a reserve for addressing crisis within their communities. And so when they're called to task on this, they often drain all of their resources and go beyond that, and don't often have an avenue to address that shortage of funds that have now taken them beyond zero. And so these are everyday challenges that we see in nonprofits, whether it's an emerging need or an everyday need. There just doesn't seem to be enough for us to have the impact to resolve and sustain. And so on the other end, you're seeing organizations close because they can't financially recover from an everyday need or an emerging need. or they're closing because the funding streams have become very competitive and it's preventing them from sustaining funding year over year. We're seeing a lot of our funding be cut from long-term to short-term. And so this is what I'm seeing in my work, and this is definitely a thread that has gone through all of the voices that we're hearing within the coalition. And so, yeah, I would say those are the major things from my perspective as to why funding issues matter.
Thank you. And Shannon, we're going to same question to you before we get to some individual questions. Why is this so important? Why these issues on funding?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think some of what I'll share will dovetail with what you've shared as well, Trinae. So I think you've already articulated, and captured kind of the rising need. I don't think this is a surprise for folks on this call, that we're all seeing the increasing demands, whether it's in Canada or globally. I think one of the pieces that we need to keep in mind is that the nonprofit sector is a critical partner for the federal government to meet its public policy objectives, whether it's being closest to community, the knowledge, the expertise, the agility, the networks, all of those assets that we bring makes us a really critical partner for the government. And so at a time when there's increasing needs, we actually play a really key role in helping the government to meet public policy objectives. I think another piece, and it's kind of related to what Trinae was saying around the funding cycle, is recognizing that we are in a context of flatlining and declining donations. I know, Bruce, I've heard you speak on it many times around the changing nature of giving in Canada. And public partnerships play an important stabilizing role, or can play an important stabilizing role. When there are declines in giving, they can be a stabilizing, a countercyclical source of partnership and of revenue to ensure that organizations are able to continue doing their work. And so this means that there's a real importance in a context of increased needs and an important partner to ensure that the mechanisms by which we're partnering are enabling us to get public dollars where they need to be faster and further for the outcomes we want for communities. So in that context, in that environment that we're currently in, the reality is that kind of red tape and over excessive administrative burden are some of the real pain points that nonprofits are facing. This includes everything from delays going from proposal to decision when we're working with the federal government. It includes having to send the same information repeatedly to one government department or across government departments. Short project cycles, which Trinae alluded to, are really problematic. It creates a boom bust cycle where you have organizations that are essentially receive funding, they're now implementing at a time where they're in the boom. And then here we are again, resubmitting applications. And with delays in applications, we might enter a bust cycle where we actually don't have resources to continue doing the good work that we're doing. There's other challenges, particularly around risk appetite, around reporting, around administrative costs in that regard, where I think one of the challenges we have is that nonprofits have a social purpose mission, and we very deeply want to ensure that we hold and gain public trust. So we're very like-minded in the sense of the federal, in terms of our alignment with the federal government on the importance of good stewardship for the resources that were provided and the outcomes we want to achieve. The challenge we have is that the provisions that are in place, the risk tolerance, the reporting provisions are not right-sized to the level of risk, to the partners involved. And to give you a concrete example, you could have an organization with a $100,000 project that has the same reporting provisions as an organization with $1 million project. It just doesn't make sense. So what we're looking for is sort of right-sized accountability for the resources to enable us to really focus on the work. I would say, and perhaps Trinae, as you share today, you'll maybe go a little deeper on this, but one of the pieces that really strikes me as being part of this coalition is, we look across the burden, the administrative burden, the inefficiencies and partnerships that exist that affects everyone in the nonprofit sector. But there is also a disproportionate impact on smaller and equity serving organizations, particularly those that are BIPOC led. They're seen often as more risky due to their size, due to having a larger volunteer base. And so what we're doing is these processes and systems are inadvertently excluding really critical partners that will advance outcomes for diverse communities across Canada.
Yeah, so I mean, the case is powerful. Maybe one other nuance I might add in too. I think Shannon, you mentioned this idea of pause and deferral as governments think about this work. One of the things we're hearing from the sector is that artificial intelligence is also changing the way that organizations apply. And I've heard from groups who have said we would have never had the capacity to apply for grants or contribution programs in the past, but as we're now using AI in our fundraising and it's learning, we're able to generate more applications and get into. I think Trini, you use the language of competition where instead of getting 150 applications, they might get 1,500 because organizations are now entering that space. If we don't have efficient, effective systems within government to be able to handle this assumed increase in volume, it will also just exacerbate the problems or the challenges that we've seen because the game is changing right before our eyes as organizations are embracing some of these new technologies. But Trinae, I'm going to come back to you. In the work that you do, what issues do you see with funding? Like, what are some of those challenges, and how do these issues translate in terms of the impact on the communities that you serve?
Thanks, Bruce. I mean, Shannon alluded to some of them, and I think that uh, the consistency is not to be dismissed because it's something that's felt across the sector. I think this list is long. It is very long, and it's not. We're not complaining. We're trying to enhance the process, right? We're trying to say, listen to us because we've done this a few times and we can help improve this for the better of the communities that we're serving. Some major things that we're seeing is funding priorities. Often we'll see a priority kind of grows with the social breeze, and it can leave communities that have received some support then left with no support, as well as funding bodies will change priorities but not even let you know, and so your funding can disappear in that way as well. And there's nuances within those funding priorities, like what's the impact that they're looking to serve? Are they numbers based or are they qualitative based? All of these nuances are not necessarily up front, even if there's webinars offered or meetings with their staff, they're often only present in the measuring of your application. So it causes a huge problem when organizations with little capacity, even using AI, are constructing their applications because you just never know if you're going to hit those points. So funding priorities is a huge issue. There's no sustainability there. It seems to go with social kind of the social vibe at the moment, which impacts the communities that we're serving. Another huge piece is program-based funding. A lot of the time, the funding that is coming out is for program specific with a very small administrative piece attached to it, which can impact the organization's ability to compensate their staff, build infrastructure, build capacity, have a sustainable organization in place if that funding was to shift and go somewhere else, and they were to replace it. So that's a huge piece that we're seeing. Yes, of course, we want to have programming, but can we look at funding the organization and the impact the organization is going to have versus a programming that may be 12 weeks in its entirety, and forget about the organization that is going to be hosting that program. So that's a large issue that we hear. Also, there's no core funding. I mentioned this previously that nonprofits are meant to start and stop on a fiscal year. And that means they have to start at zero consistently. The way to support that process is to have core funding on more than a year basis that allows the organization to set up its practices, to have proper financial practices, governance, all of these things that can support strong programming. So we can't have one arm lifting weight and the other arm is not usable at all. And so core funding is a huge resolution to that problem. Also, two other things is the application and reporting process is quite cumbersome. And often it's not really focused on what it needs to be focused on for the project to be successful or the application to be successful. There's a whole bunch of additional information, and sometimes when you're applying to the same body, you're reiterating that information again and again and again. So there seems to be no continuity, and it makes the process really cumbersome. So in the end, how does that impact the communities that we're serving? There's more time being focused on the administrative process than the impact process. Again, with no compensation for that administrative process. So we're seeing teams do a lot of off the side of their desks because they still have a program to deliver to community, which impacts their capacity, it impacts their sustainability. And we see this time and time again. Burnout is at the highest rate it's ever been. I mean, well, with the exception of COVID, that was a certain circumstance, but we're not seeing it come down. We're seeing it be consistent because the sector's being asked for more and more and more, but the systems are not changing to support them. And in the end, we're seeing programming go away. We're seeing communities who need vital supports go without. And long-term, that's impacting the health of Canadians. Yeah, so I would say overall, that's what we're seeing. I'm seeing from my perspective. And I think the funding reform group is addressing those issues and asking for change to combat it.
Yeah. And so just as I come to Shannon about about a question around the specifics of as to what the coalition is advocating for, Trinae, one of the things I'll invite you to think about, because I see a question coming in the chat and we get to them in a few minutes, is around the relationship between longer term, more sustainable, potentially core funding, and how that might relate and what the sort of the position might be on emergency funding for organizations. So we'll come to that in a minute. But Shannon, sort of over to you now. So you've been involved with the coalition's work since the almost the very beginning. Can you tell us a bit more about what we're specifically asking for the federal government to change? And from the conversations you've been part of, how has the message been received so far?
Yeah, as Trey alluded to, the list is long. And I think many of us have had, I assume on this call, different experiences, and we'll have different kind of priorities in terms of what we're advocating for. What we've done as a group is we have tried to distill, given the moment we're in, the opportunity we see around a government looking to reduce red tape, we have distilled down to sort of 4 key asks. The first ask is one partner, one profile. Wouldn't that just be fantastic? You upload your information one time and then it's there, it's in the system. You update it when you need to, but you're essentially reducing that duplication of effort and administration in terms of kind of the ability to then work with the government and submit for new opportunities, engage more, and so on. So one partner, one profile is our first sort of key ask. The second is around a grants first approach when working with the nonprofit sector. So this will not resolve all of the challenges, that's for sure. But the reality is that there is a default use of contribution agreements over grants, which increases red tape. And there's a real opportunity here for us to have greater flexibility when working with the government, a more trust-based relationship, a right-sized risk approach with a greater use of grants. So that is one of our kind of 2 key asks that we think would reduce the administrative burden for the government as well as for partners. Now, in terms of actual partnership, when working with the government, we've then identified 2 additional asks. The first is around greater flexibility for nonprofits to move funds between budget lines. We've all been in situations as organizations where the context has changed. Maybe a critical partner has moved on, whatever the case may be, needs have changed. And we need the ability to then change and move resources to effectively meet our outcomes. The experience is very mixed across the sector. The main department that I work with, Global Affairs Canada, we have up to 40% flexibility between our project activity lines. That was a huge win for us in our engagement with the department because it really does enable that flexibility we need when context changes. Since joining this coalition, I've learned that others need to ask for an amendment if they want to move up to 15% between lines. So that's really creating a huge administrative burden for not highly impactful amendments that we'd be making to our contracts and our agreements with the government. So really standardizing and allowing greater flexibility across the budget lines is another ask that we have. And finally, we're looking to see longer funding terms and a reduced wait time around funding approvals. Um, in terms of the funding terms, I am aware that, of course, some organizations have 3, 4, 5-year projects that they have with the government. Others, it's a 1-year cycle. Can we move towards longer multi-year funding cycles that recognize that change takes time, value partners and the contributions that they bring, and fundamentally would reduce the burden on all sides, right? Longer term horizons means less submissions, less proposals, more effective reporting, more opportunity for learning, more opportunity to realize outcomes. And then related to that, I think is the wait time for funding approvals. We often, there's been many reports that have been done looking at this issue, 5 to 7 months from submission to approvals. I've heard up to 18 months with some government departments before you find out if your project has been accepted. So we see that as a real area there that we would need to move on, and the one partner, one profile, and the other changes we're suggesting would help us to move in that direction. Bruce, you asked how this has been received. So I would say we've had a number of different conversations, both at kind of political level as well as at bureaucratic level. I would say there's a general recognition that we're in a policy window moment. We have a government that wants to streamline. We want to reduce kind of duplication of effort. The challenge for us is to get this agenda on that list of priorities to reduce red tape. But I think we've heard generally a warm reception to this as an issue and an opportunity and a recognition that, yes, this is a space where we could get some efficiencies on all sides and improve outcomes. I would say, in terms of our engagement with kind of government departments, we have engaged with a number that are actually going through processes of transforming their grants and contribution agreements. And these have been incredibly helpful conversations for us to refine our messaging and our implementation pathways. So I'll give you one concrete example. One of the challenges with our idea around one partner, one profile, as we have been told, is around privacy and data sharing constraints within government and privacy law. When we've been in these conversations, our stance has been, okay, let's solve this together. Like, better is better. Can we map the constraints? Can we understand? Can we design safeguards together? Can we pilot a way to reuse information to reduce the administrative burden on both sides? And so I think what's been helpful about these conversations is, we're kind of pitching into the machine our suggestions, and it's really helped us to refine and identify the pain points that will stop these reforms from going ahead, and really enabled us to create a co-collaborative space around, okay, how do we then work through these challenges or these issues? In terms of our next steps, I would say that one of our key next steps is really looking to pursue a meeting with the Office of Minister Lightbound, who's responsible for government transformation, to really to kind of get a sense of how we can align this with the broader modernization agenda that's happening across the government. But yeah, maybe I'll stop there, Bruce. There's lots of times for questions, but that gives you a bit of a flavor of how this has been received so far.
Yeah, that's super helpful, and I've heard similar things that we are in a policy moment, and this idea of having. I also think this is sort of kudos to the group that's been working for a couple of years on this. The fact that these recommendations have been well thought out, well articulated, evidence-based, and are ready to go is helpful when this window comes open, because one of the things we are seeing with the Carney government is that they are interested in moving quickly on things. And so being ready to try and be part of this broad red tape review is important. So we've got a bunch of questions that have come in, which is great. Right before we turn to them, though, I think it would be helpful to really talk a little bit about how the coalition works, what's been accomplished, and what we could expect next year. So maybe to kick off on kind of the structural piece around the coalition, maybe Trinae, you can carry the ball for that for a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So the structure of the coalition, it started out with a steering committee, which worked on the framework. Currently, the steering committee is still in operation, and it's being led by a number of contributors. I'll name their organizations: Assembly of Seventh Generations, Community Sector Network PEI, BGC, Charlottetown, Ashante Network, Imagine Canada, Scale Cooperative, Leadership Consulting, Cooperation Canada, and C Center for Young Black Professionals. So if any of those names sound familiar, you can get a sense that this is nationwide. We're focusing on the experience nationwide, and diverse organizations within them. We have committees working on advocacy, research, and mobilization, as well as building relationships with others who are working on funding reform. We also have coalition supporters who aren't actively involved in the committees, but they receive updates and invites to general meetings and are invited to participate in major initiatives we organize, such as letter campaigns. And if you're interested in joining the coalition, you can sign up for our newsletter on the Imagine Canada website. So yeah, there's a various number of ways that you can get involved, and share your experience or impact the work that we're doing.
Terrific. And then Shannon, maybe just a quick update and sort of progress and what's coming.
Yeah, sure. So obviously the coalition has spent time building our foundation to work together, synthesizing the evidence for the funding reforms that we're looking to see happen, developing our policy agenda, building relationships, and so on. We recently had an op-ed placed in Le Devoir, one of the largest media outlets in Francophone Canada, and we're pitching an English op-ed right now. We've also had a lot of productive meetings with government. Trinae and I participated with Emily Jensen on the team at Imagine Canada in a Hill Day, because it was 2 weeks ago, which is a great opportunity for us to meet with decision makers as part of the annual Nonprofits on the Hill Day organized by Imagine Canada. Upcoming, we will be participating in the 2026 pre-budget consultations. There was also a piece of research that will be coming out in the coming months. Imagine Canada is partnering with St. Paul's University, and the research really looks at how federal funding policies and practices impact the communities served by the sector. And we are in the process of planning our advocacy campaigns for 2026 that will, of course, enable mobilization of the sector on this issue. And, as Trinae mentioned, there's opportunity to sign up to get updates on all of this work.
And we would love to grow and grow and grow this coalition so that we are ensuring that constituencies right across the country are represented in those conversations they're having with their members of parliament, regardless of political stripe. So a few things as we head into the Q&A. So one, just to let you know, Senator Senior was here and was trying to get in, but as I've understood it from the work I've done with government technology and Zoom sometimes do not play nicely together. And so if she is able to, and her office is able to send along a few remarks, we'll share them before we go. The second thing is we've got a number of comments and questions coming in, so it is unlikely that we'll get to all of them. What I'm going to do is direct a question to one of our two panelists. If the other person wants to jump in, great, but if we can maybe just keep it to one of you, that way we can get to more questions. That would be great. And so, Trinae, we are going to start with you around the question as it relates to emergency funding, but I'm going to give Shannon a second to just sort of tee up on one before I come to her. And that question is, how will Prime Minister Carney and Finance Minister Champagne's announcement on modernizing the budget to be focused on a capital budgeting framework and this announced shift to a fall budget cycle impact the sector's ability to advocate and succeed? So really the core there is the capital budget framework and the shift to the fall budget cycle. But Trinae, here's the question. What role can emergency short-term grants play in supporting organizations facing urgent challenges in today's sector landscape? And what should these grants prioritize to be the most effective?
That's a great question. And I think there's a few that kind of are on that thread. So I'm going to kind of try and answer them all that I've been reading as we're going through this. I think the biggest thing in terms of emergency funding is it can't be placed to fix a problem within an organization. First, we have to fix the funding piece, the sustainable funding piece that's happening consistently. That piece has to be fixed first, because if an organization is operating at zero and then you're going to put another fund, emergency fund on that, what I'm seeing right now is that's a band-aid within the organizations and it's impacting their sustainability. So number one, I'm going to say you have to fix the funding structure first, and that will allow organizations with emergency supports to apply to emergency grants and act accordingly. I specifically work within the B3 sector. My work is very Black focused, and a lot of what we've seen over the past few years has been short-term funding to address needs within the Black community. And when we use terms like B3, so that's Black focus, Black serving, and Black led, those organizations are by us for us. So when there is a crisis happening in our community and there is a fund to address that, it's important to prioritize those voices, whether they're constructing the funding structure on how to address the emergency or whether they're receiving the funds to address it. I mean, I do believe in collaborative working, but I think that asking for collaborative applications for emergencies without a bigger pot or without a restrictive pot can be very dangerous. And so I think those three areas are what I would suggest. Number one, to fix the actual sustainable funding piece first, and then we can talk about short-term emergency funding. And I believe when you have emergency funding, it should be by us for us, whatever community that is, or whatever crisis we're looking to address. And then the last piece is if we're asking for collaborative applications to address a need, that the funding makes sense for that. You can't ask for 3 organizations to have a high impact with $40,000. It's just does not make sense. So yeah, that would be my input.
That's great. Thank you. I suspect that both of you are going to earn your keep based on the questions that I'm seeing come in, because there's some good ones in here. So Trinae, I'm just going to give you a second to think about this when we go to Shannon's question. This is really related to positions taken by fair funding for nonprofits. Does the coalition have a stance on the role of public funding, i.e. grants and contributions from government, versus foundation and other philanthropic funding? So we'll come to that in a second. So to Shannon, again, really just curious about the modernization of the budget to be focused on capital budgeting and the fall budget cycle impact our ability to succeed.
Yeah. So I would say maybe a couple of reflections that I can offer. I think one around the fall budget cycle. The reality is we're all waiting for this budget to drop, regardless of what sector you're in. And one of the pieces that this coalition, I think, has been pretty adept at is identifying the opportunities as they present themselves. So we've had really positive conversations at political and bureaucratic level, some less positive at the bureaucratic level, but that's okay. We'll get there. But certainly around kind of the red tape reduction initiative. And so I think for us, our next step will be to see what's in this fall budget, get a sense of what might be the policy opportunities and windows as a result of the signals we have there, and then kind of shift and pivot accordingly. I was trying to think of how to effectively answer this question around the shifting to a capital budgeting framework. And I, to be transparent, would say we haven't actually thought through that as an advocacy committee yet. What does that really mean for us, right? How do we frame investments in communities and investments in key partners as part of that narrative of these longer term kind of investment approach? So I think there's a thread for us certainly to be pulling on that one, but I don't know that we've come up with a full-fledged strategy yet.
Great, thank you. Maybe I'll just add a kind of moderator's privilege. I'll add a bit of an editorial comment in here, because the question is an astute one in the sense that we do have to adapt. And I think what we'll see is the sector's advocacy efforts will now be recalibrated to understand the timelines in terms of the preparation of the annual budget now coming out in the fall. But one of the things I will say, and I think Shannon, you had sort of alluded to it earlier, is how do we get the work of this coalition and the sector's interests on this very large agenda around red tape reduction? Because this is way more than charities and nonprofits. And I will say that one thing that we've been consistently hearing, particularly from Liberal members of Parliament, is to get local MPs to raise this issue in caucus. So I often hear from organizations who say, what can we do? We're sitting in rural Saskatchewan or northern Canada or southern Quebec. We don't have a cabinet minister. What can we do? Well, if you've got a Liberal MP, going and visiting that Liberal MP and saying, would you raise the need for fair funding and funding reform for charities and nonprofits at the next cabinet discussion? That's when it's going to start to pick up some steam and get some wind in our sails. So it's just one thing that I think that we need to do, effectively as a group. So, Shannon, I'll come back to you in a second. Where do the segment of charities and nonprofits who do not receive funding from the federal government at all fit in this coalition's work? But in the meantime, Trinae, we'll just come back to you on the question around the stance of public government funding versus foundation or other philanthropic funding, and has the coalition talked about that?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. Before I do address that, I just want to say, you touched on a very good point. Understanding government relations at all three levels of government is very important. I know Imagine Canada does some education on this. So to see, reach out to organizations that are reaching across the sector and providing education, because not only will you learn how to do advocacy work, but you'll also start experiencing it and crack open that world that can be very impactful for your organizations and the priorities that you're looking at. And also, we're all here. They are government servants. They serve us. So you have the opportunity you have the right and the opportunity to go and speak to them. So knock on those doors consistently. Sometimes it takes a few months to even get an answer, but just continue to do it. It's part of the work, it's part of the advocacy work that we're talking about here today. So grants and contributions versus private sector. As a coalition, very early on, we identified that we wanted to focus a bit more on the government side of things rather than the private sector, because the private sector is so vast across the country and there's different priorities and different ways of doing. But there was this notion that if we could push the government to hear us and kind of start addressing some of these issues at a national level, it could drive change across the sector. And then also knowing that we all are reporting. That's an opportunity to give your feedback on what you're experiencing as a grantee. It's vital. In terms of grants and contributions, there is a little bit of reading that we can all do in terms of who's responsible, what is the legislation on that, what is a grant versus a contribution. All the ministries seem to do it differently, and that all comes down from the Treasury Department as to what are grants and what are contributions, how long the terms can be, all of those things. So I encourage you all, and maybe we can provide some of this documentation, is that the Treasury Department really outlines all of those pieces. Whereas the private sector, that's up to the mandate of the funding body. So whether it's a foundation or most likely it is a foundation, they can set their priorities and they can set their rules, their reporting, their application, all of those things. So we're hoping that if we drive the change at a national level, it will trickle through, but please use the resources that are at your fingertips on it every day, which is your reporting and your feedback methods through your grants.
Thanks, Trinae. And by the way, we did not plant this question, but I feel compelled to just also mention, because the question at its heart was about, philanthropy and other forms of funding and then government funding. Today, we've just released a report on funding best practices for corporations. So really looking at what's happening around the world here in Canada, and it was developed in conjunction with Corporate Canada. So that's out today, and there may be some ways that we can actually share those around so that the entire funding community benefits. So before, Shannon, I come to you on the question around those who aren't really benefiting from federal government funding. Trinae, I'll then bounce back to you, and I'm going to summarize a few thoughts in here into one question, because there's been comments or questions around trust-based philanthropy, more flexibility in terms of, and I know Shannon, you mentioned it about moving items around in lines to show flexibility as things change during the course of a grant, and really also allowing more for administration, those core overhead or operational costs. So, Trinae, I guess the question I'm going to come back to you on is, in the conversations that the coalition has been in, what's your sense in terms of the receptivity to that kind of thinking? Because it kind of strikes at a bit of a core long-term narrative around accountability, around a disdain for core operating costs, et cetera. So just curious as to if you're getting any early feedback from government about those kinds of things. So Shannon, to you, where do the segment of charities and nonprofits who do not receive funding from Canada, the federal government at all, fit into the coalition's work? Is there a mandate?
Yeah, so I suppose I would maybe say a couple things about the makeup of the coalition itself. So we do have organizations that are part of the coalition that do not receive federal government funding. This includes, I saw one of the questions in the Q&A, a question about, folks consultants that work with nonprofits exclusively. Is there a space for them to be participating? We do have those types of folks in this coalition, actually. So certainly there is space for different actors. There's foundations that are part of the coalition. And I would say part of their interest is around the strengthening of the ecosystem benefits us all. There's also organizations that have wanted to be a part of government funding and haven't necessarily been successful, that have faced those barriers and would love to kind of be a part of the conversation around how to reduce those barriers. Maybe just a final piece to say, as we're building evidence and thinking about the way we advocate for reforms, it is helpful for us to have examples of other funding models, of other governments that do things differently. And that also feeds into the way that we can then ask for reforms with the federal government.
Great, thank you. So, Trinae, kind of that summary question around, what you're kind of hearing about. I'm just keeping an eye on the time here because we're clearly not going to get to all these great questions, and I'd love to be able to summarize some of these notes and send them back out. But I am going to just tee up the question I'm going to ask both of you before we go. It's one that came in. If you could give any advice to those who are funding nonprofits and setting budgets for the future, what would you say? And I'm going to restrict it to one piece of advice. So if you are thinking about this in the work that the coalition is doing, and you are going to give one piece of advice on this, what would it be? But in the meantime, Trinae, let's just ask that question about, as we're thinking about flexibility, trust-based philanthropy, more core funding, what's the sense of the reception that you've been getting in the conversations you've had?
Yeah, I think it's important to note the impact that the nonprofit sector has on the economy in Canada. It's a huge contributor as a sector in of itself. And I could be conflating these numbers. Shannon, can you help me out? Is it 1.2 million workers in the sector?
It's about 2.5.
2.5. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So with that at play, we're talking not only about operational costs, but we're also talking about fair wages for fair work. And in that same conversation, we're talking about our staff being burnt out. The amount of effort it takes to do community work is like no other. And so, yes, it is very important for us to have operational costs in the conversation. What I will say is that when we did present it at Hill Day, a lot of the conversation was based upon the government transformation and where it best aligned. And I will say that I find that as 2.0 of the conversation. It was really like about getting the issue to be proposed, and then we can give the layup. But it's an important piece that we can't drop. And Shannon mentioned earlier about having flexibility to move through budget lines, and often there is zero flexibility to move more to the administrative line because it's capped and it's in bold letters, and you're never going to get a cent more put in that line. And so it's an important piece not to leave out of the conversation and continuously be driving forward. And it's definitely part of our asks. But what we really saw was the government kind of alluding to that they're looking for systems change, they're looking for a reduction of red tape, and they're trying to find the right place to place that. And thankfully, Imagine Canada's Hill Day correctly aligned with these conversations, because to our knowledge, this wasn't in the conversation. So like Shannon said, looking for that one key player to champion this conversation and get it on the agenda.
Wonderful. As we come to the last question, I also want to mention that Canadians are widely supportive of this work. So we've just come out of the field with some consumer polling, both focus groups first and then broader consumer polling. And one of the questions that we asked was around inviting respondents to sort of think about the characteristics of the organizations they valued the most. And when they were really looking at those responses, what was at the top of the list? That 80% they provide services that directly benefit the local community. Supporting them seems like the right thing to do. There is this desire to get engaged. And the organization has a strong reputation for delivering on its promises. 80%, 79%, and 79%. But as we're talking about government and trying to move an old way of thinking, the cost and efficiency attributes fell far below. Things like that their overhead was in line with industry standards. Only 12% of respondents indicated that that was something that they're really interested in. Overhead reasonable for governing an organization that size, only 11%. So as we're thinking about this shift to more flexibility, to longer term, to trust-based, politicians should know that Canadians, by and large, support this work. And we're going to be releasing these findings in the coming weeks. So with that, we're going to come with the final question, and that's, oh, I've already lost it, but it's this one around, if you could give any advice to those, like one piece of advice to those who are funding and you know, the ones that you're talking with and setting these budgets for the future, what would you say? Shannon, we're going to start with you. This is the lightning round because we're into the last couple of minutes.
Yeah. Thanks, Bruce. Honestly, it's about building trust in relationships and then behaving as if you're in a relationship that has trust. And so, I mean, I can fund quickly, fund flexibly, count what matters. I mean, these are like the basic things that should exist if you have trust and you're in a relationship. So I think that would be my final point.
Wonderful. Thank you. Trinae.
I mean, the list is quite long, but I think for me, it's understanding that this change that Canadians need in Canadian communities is long term. It's not 1 year, it's not 6 months, it's not 12 weeks. It takes a lot of time. And so, like Shane said, building trust with the nonprofit sector and empowering them to do the work that the Canadian government, the Canadian citizens need is vital. And the last piece I will say is like moving away from the one-to-one impact. Like, we give you $1, we want this one thing. That's not what change looks like. That's not what impact looks like. And so looking at it very holistically and long-term of what it looks like to truly change a Canadian's life.
And I will add, and I saw it reflected in the comments, that we should also have a relationship with the federal government where these programs build communities in such a way that the very charitable and nonprofit partners and the people who work there should be paid in a way that they don't actually need the services of the very organizations they work for. This is going to be critically important for our sector going forward. So as we bring our session to a close, I want to thank both of you so much, not only for being here today and sharing your thoughts and wisdoms and insight, but for being part of the coalition and all the work. And to those who joined us today, thank you so much. It's so great. We had over 600 people registered for this session. To see so many folks interested in advocating for fair funding for nonprofits. Our passionate plea is to join the coalition. The stronger that we are, the stronger we can be together, the better it will be for the outcomes that we hope to achieve. So a recording will be shared by email within a few weeks, and wishing you all a great remainder of the day wherever you've come in from across the country. So have a great
Bruce?
day. Yeah.
Sorry,
Oh.
I just see that Senator Paulette Sr. seems to have
Oh my
joined
gosh.
the room, so I don't want to
Yay.
let us miss her.
Senator, glad you could join us. You're going to get the final word. And you're just on mute there.
Oh my goodness, isn't that something?
So I'm going to turn the floor to you to just have the opportunity to address the folks that are here. And of course, this recording will be going out to hundreds and hundreds of folks across the country.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And I felt as if something was missing when I couldn't join you. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. But technology is what it is. But just thank you for including me in this and including me in the launch of this important initiative. I know, Bruce, that you and I have had many conversations over the years around the importance of addressing how the sector is funded. And so to have this fair funding coalition that I am now calling the FFC, I don't know if I'm breaching anything, but to have that in place, especially now when we don't know what to expect, the sector doesn't know what to expect, but this has been a long-standing issue for those of us, and I keep saying us, I still consider myself a part of the sector. I grew up in the sector. So it's very important that this is an initiative that we're doing as a coalition and in collaboration. And what I want to say as well is please use me however it makes sense for you. Because, when Senator Omidvar retired as a senator, she essentially passed me the baton. But we've had some, disruption since then. We had prorogation, we had an election, and so we're getting our feet back under us. And so, I am here to support however I can in the capacity that I have, and the privilege that I have to sit in the Senate as well. So please utilize me in whatever way makes sense for you. And please also know that I will also need you in the sense of wanting to support whatever key messages you want to put in place, and to help the sector that employs probably more than 1 in 10 Canadians now, but also contributes so much to the GDP of this country that we deserve to be seen, heard, and valued and be respected. And so this, I think, is an initiative that will get us closer there. And again, congratulations on the launch today.
Thanks so much. And I have to say, it's wonderful to know that we have allies in government, both in the Senate and in the House. And I know that even as soon as tomorrow, a group is coming together to have a conversation around how can we advance the interests of charities and nonprofits on an ongoing basis, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of branch of government, because it's critically important that organizations are there when Canadians turn to them, and more are turning to them every day. So thank you for joining us. Glad the technology was able to get sorted out. Thanks to everyone for being here today, and we will be in touch soon. Have a great rest of the day.
Take care, everyone.